Should I, can you hear me now? This doesn't work, right?
The recording.
Oh, it's for recording. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, we don't need it here. I have a speaker integrated, fortunately. uh, I'm going to start by apologizing because I had to cut this text. I wrote too many pages in the past few days, and I had 30 pages yesterday, and I woke up early today to fit it into 20-minute text, so I lost 20 pages this morning. Hopefully it's not too motivated, and it makes sense. Well, I don't know if I should start talking a bit, presenting myself and why I wrote this. I'm a teacher at the University of Zacatecas. I've been there for 14 years. I was born here in Mexico City. I studied philosophy here. And working at the University of Zacatecas has been quite challenging because I worked at small communities for 12 years. Very small communities where violence grew tremendously in the past 15 years or so. And working at the psychology school, teaching philosophy courses, epistemology, and another course titled Philosophy and Psyche, and narrative research methods, phenomenological and hermeneutical methods, and life story method. That's been the work I did there for 12 years. And it's been really interesting because many of those students went to psychology school because the university opened there recently, and that was like the only chance for them to study in a range of 300 miles. So it was the only chance they had. They either had to choose nurse school or psychology. So many of them went to psychology school without even knowing what psychology was. And of course, they had more distant idea of what philosophy also was. Despite of this, it was a very interesting experience for me because many times when we were reading Plato or Kant or whatever text we were working on, a very rich conversation started in the classroom, and the students started writing their own essays, and we did a student colloquy, and it was very, very stimulating for me as a teacher to learn from their experiences, from their first attempts of doing an academic text. And I've actually learned a lot from their experiences in those research methods courses. So that's like a little part of the context. It was in 2014 when 43 students from Guerrero were disappeared forcibly in Mexico. And after that, many of the students who traveled 2, 3, or 4 hours to get to the university did not want, of course, to go and deal with some of their classmates protesting because of what had happened, as many other universities did, also starting in Mexico City, of course. But once I showed them first the text of some of that, one of those students who went to Zacatecas, to the city, that was November 3rd of 2014. And I filmed his testimony. I transcribed the whole thing. It was, I don't know, 40 minutes. And at first I showed them the text, and many of them were like, well, yeah, they're actually kind of like us, but we don't want to know too much about it, and we are were willing to take classes and not deal with that. In the second moment, I showed them the video. And once they saw the video, after having read the text, many of them got really sentimental and solid. They were more solidary with the cause. So after they decided to protest at that small town called Juan Aldama, they started following me and them. And armed people went in the university when they took the campus, the university, and intimidated them. They used to follow me when I worked there for like 8 hours, and then I had to go grab a bite. And sometimes they were following me and intimidating me. Yeah, it was the local police, but now we know that they were also part of criminal groups. So it was a hard time. In January, they killed a colleague from the art school, Armando Haro. And in February, they tried to break in my house while I was expecting my first son to be born. My mate was pregnant. And that was a frightening and life-changing experience. So I was working on a doctoral thesis comparing the Unbewusstsein concept in Freud and Dilthey, the unconscious concept. And after these events, I changed my research and did something else, which has to do with this reflection. So I'll start reading now. The passion of thought, conversation, and research in the human sciences. In the act of writing and describing, an unknown world becomes imaginable and thinkable for those who, in a future time, will approach the text. But imagination and thought are always events, not objects that we control, and they are not available to us. This applies to the readers as well as to the authors. The world to be imagined is unknown for all. Literary production can create fictionalized realities that become mere objects of consumption or contribute to creating a critical framework that activates conversation. The mimetic desire aims to be honored and retributed economically in the former. I'm thinking about how they write narconovelas and all this literature who make from these drug lords idols, and all the series in Netflix and all these cultural products, which sells very, very well. In the latter case, the mimetic desire is creating a work that can stimulate and contribute to conversations of intellectual, critical, and creative value, although maybe not selling products. Either way, it is a triangle desire and action in which we are entangled with others. As Levinas has written, some thoughts operate on objects before thinking about them. Pre-reflexive thought also operates in our daily lives without us being aware of it. We live by representing, operating, doing, and acting. These actions come out of nowhere, apparently. We need not to reflect on our pre-comprehension to enact it. We need not to reflect our way of thinking to think irreflexively. Thought emerges as mimesis, not as conscious reflection. It is such passion for our own thoughts that we must start by thinking. It is from our own existence, our own thinking and acting over things in the world, that we think our being, thinking and acting in the world we are in with others. In our everyday existence, we often engage with the world through actions before conscious reflection. The pre-reflexive thought operates seamlessly without us explicitly pondering it. We live by doing, by acting upon the world around us. Our bodies are intimately involved in this process. Before conscious deliberation, we simply reach for objects, walk, speak, and interact with others. These actions emerge spontaneously, driven by a pre-comprehension of our environment. When we catch a ball, our bodies respond instinctively without pausing to calculate or reason about trajectories. This passionate engagement is at the core of our existence. Thought emerges as mimesis, a form of imitation or enactment. We do not consciously think about how we think, walk, drive, write, or ride a bike. We simply do it. Our bodies know how to do it through embodied memory. Theoretical knowledge is not necessary for this. Our practices are never individual since our existence is intertwined with others. We think, act, and feel within a shared world. Our interactions, whether a smile, a handshake, or a shared meeting or meal, reveal our being in the world with fellow humans in a constant mimetic fashion. In summary, a pre-reflexive yet mimetic thought is the heartbeat of our existence. It is the unspoken but operating language of our bodies and minds, the rhythm of our actions, and the passions that fuel our engagement with the world. It is also through such irreflexive and automatic mechanisms that unsatisfied violence always finds a replacement victim, a scapegoat. In René Girard's words, I have the quote in French, but I won't read it because my French is not too good, so I'll read the translation. Unsatisfied violence always seeks and ends up finding a replacement victim. For the creature excited by her fury, she suddenly substitutes another who has no particular right to attract the wrath of the violent, except that she is vulnerable and passes within his reach. We are not, and that's the end of the quote, we are not immediately aware of how we react and think. Our own inner and immediate experience does not make us conscious of our own subjectivity by itself. Wilhelm Dilthey suggested that only through the detour of the externalization of our own psychic life is it possible, in a second moment, to fix those expressions, objectify them, to return to them and interpret them. For Dilthey, verbal and written expression would make possible a detailed and partially exhaustive understanding of our subjectivity. Even today, human sciences can still benefit critically from phenomenological and hermeneutical research methods if researchers are willing to listen carefully to descriptions of people's lived experiences and transcribe, is that how you say it? Transcribe such narratives extensively. In Emmanuel Levinas' words in his text, The Ruin of Representation from 1959, the subjectivity in which our existence and being are revealed is, I quote, more objective than all objectivity. That's the end of the quote. Phenomenology is one of the most influential philosophical traditions of the 20th century. It has significantly shaped contemporary human sciences, including anthropology and social theory. First, by emphasizing the conditions of experience, exploring how they shape what it means to exist and be human in specific contexts. Human sciences in general draw on this perspective to understand how humans are always relationally intertwined with each other, entities in their worlds and the worlds themselves. Phenomenology also highlights our embodied existence and situates human experience within the world. We can use this framework to study how cultural practices, rituals, and everyday life are intertwined within our singular forms of being in the world. Levinas considered phenomenology, I quote, an analysis of consciousness in which the greatest care is devoted to structure. End of the quote. By such analysis, we describe, that's another quote, the way one movement of the soul is integrated into another. End of the quote. There are no individual ingredients, but an overlapped and embedded whole of a phenomenon resulting from every movement's interactions. It is essential here to remember that, according to Levinas, there are no isolated components within consciousness. From his perspective, everything is interconnected in our soul. Its movements overlap, intertwine, and influence each other. An integrated whole, a phenomenon, emerges from the dynamic interplay of these movements. And here's a more extensive quote from this text from Levinas. He says, "A new style in philosophy arises. It has not become a rigorous science as a body of universally compelling doctrines, but phenomenology has inaugurated an analysis of consciousness in which the greatest care is devoted to structure, the way one movement of the soul is integrated into another, and the way it rests and overlaps is embedded into the whole of a phenomenon. One can no longer analyze by enumerating the ingredients of a state of soul." I remember the Thetus from Plato here, when he's talking about logos. The points of reference of these formulas of structure certainly depend on the ultimate presuppositions of the doctrine, but a new spirit of rigor has been established. Penetration is not a question of touching the subtle of the infinitely small in the soul, but in not leaving these elements or their developments without structure. These are the points that seem to me essential to all post-Husserlian thought, and they constitute the benefit that I, for my small part, have derived from a long acquaintance with Husserl's works. That's the end of the quote from Levinas. Levinas finds a whole new style in philosophy in the phenomenological approach. What the extensive description of consciousness can bring to our awareness is of great value. The subjective acts that grasp ideal essences to a lived experience can be described, transcribed, and thus comprehended deeply. Phenomenology recognizes that consciousness is not a simple binary state, but exists along a continuum of different states that only through description and transcription become thinkable. By studying this continuum, researchers gain insights into the various forms in which consciousness varies during different experiences. Phenomenology's descriptive understanding helps human sciences explore the richness and complexity of conscious experience by going beyond abstract concepts and engaging with lived realities. This detailed exploration provides a more primordial understanding of human phenomena than any statistical approach. I quote Levinas again. Why this return to the description of consciousness? Would it be interesting or instructive to know, besides the ideal essences, the subjective acts that grasp them? End of the quote. Husserl does not assume the sovereignty of representation as a merely formal and logical structure of something else in which no feeling plays a role, and nothing presents itself to the will. An abstract thought as such, I quote, forgets the implications of thought. The implications of such thought are invisible prior to reflection on it. Thinking must reflect upon itself. It must think of itself to transcend an operating dimension that does not truly reflect on itself. I'm going to skip a quote that I've kind of commented about. Husserl has taught us, okay, Husserl has taught us not to reduce objective beings to states of consciousness or vice versa. There is a recourse to a subjective field that is said to be more objective than all objectivity. Settling this field is, for Levinas, the greatest of Husserl's contributions. Levinas suggests that subjectivity arises from cognitive activity and shapes how we engage with the world. Unlike external objects which exist independently of consciousness, subjectivity emerges from our cognitive and mental processes. Thus, subjectivity is inherently tied to our cognitive operations, making it more immediate and intimately connected to our existence than the external world. We cannot deny that the objective world provides solid evidence. I have a pop-up now here, sorry. Evidence of things, but this evidence is always necessarily related to our cognitive activity. For example, when we perceive an object, the evidence of its existence is mediated by our senses and categories that make representation and interpretation possible. Subjectivity, in contrast, occurs directly and immediately within our cognitive field. It does not rely on external evidence, but emerges from our inner experience. We can find an example of the intertwining of subjectivity and objectivity in the film Scenes from a Marriage by Ingmar Bergman, when Marianne looks at a hanged photograph of herself as a kid. This simple perception triggers a flood of thoughts and memories that, through a stream of consciousness, reveal the most intimate insight of the character along the film, and from which an ethical questioning of her own ways of relating to others arises at a decisive point in which her own desire of being, apart from mimetic instances, becomes possible. Marianne can become aware of herself and her desires by reading back the text she wrote in an automatic description earlier. Without this fixed expression, she could not understand and become conscious of what had occurred during an unexpected insight. For Levinas, the subjectivity issue extends to an ethical one. When we encounter the other, we do not merely perceive an object that is part of the external world and that we can perceive. We also engage with their subjectivity, their consciousness, intentions, and vulnerability. For Levinas, our ethical duty emerges precisely from recognizing this subjective dimension in the other. Levinas' claim that subjectivity is more objective than all objectivity highlights the immediacy and relationality of our cognitive processes. It challenges us to consider how our subjectivity shapes our understanding of the world and our social relations with others. Our experience becomes possible subjectively and intersubjectively within such non-self-evident facts. The transcendental givers of meaning for our experience are to be grasped, described, and considered by revolving around the same expressions that do not show their complexity and truth in their immediate appearance. It is from subjectivity that social interactions shape themselves, but at the same time, subjectivity emerges from intersubjective interactions. It is from such an intersubjective realm that singular narratives emerge, and it is from those singular narratives that human sciences primarily depart to build a deep understanding of human lives. I will skip a few lines. Levinas critiques the traditional view where Sinnegebung, meaning-making, Sinngebung, is solely the work of an individual and sovereign ego. In this framework, the other, although existing, is reduced to an object of representation. The individual ego's totalizing tendency seeks to absorb the other into its own system of meaning, often disregarding the other's unique subjectivity. It fails to recognize the other as existent. Levinas proposes a phenomenological approach that transcends this egocentric representation. By exploring lived experiences and the structures of consciousness. So I'm going to skip another paragraph just to read the final one. But how can we engage in a respectful, well, no, I need to go back just a line. Sorry. The other's existence cannot be subordinate to our understanding. The other, just as the self, is a mystery, an infinity that eludes complete comprehension. These thoughts contribute to a more compassionate and intellectually stimulating society where conversation is still valued. But how can we engage in a respectful encounter when we are trying to understand, not justify, those who, by whatever mimetic influence, have engaged themselves in violent forms of living? How are we to remain willing to approach and question the forms in which violence perpetrators are indeed also victims of a social dynamics that has trapped them into a desire that reproduces in them without a sufficient agency enabling resistance? How can scholars suspend our spontaneous judgments and listen carefully to what, due to the horror, resists even being contemplated and considered carefully? That's the end of the text. I'll just make a final comment. I finished my doctorate thesis. I published a book 3 years ago with 2 narratives, one from that student that I shared from a student from Ayotzinapa, which I shared with my students, and another one from this young man who approached me once in that same small town and shared with me a 2-hour narrative of how he was, how he entered a criminal organization, how he started working for them, and what was the desire that led him to do that. He shared with me how he left the group. He told his boss or whatever, I cannot be here anymore. I'm sick of this. And he actually left, but then they kidnapped him and another group forced him to work for them. And then he quit again and he hid for a while. And I made a transcription of that and included it in my doctoral research and on this book that derived from it. And it was exactly a Thursday, but it was the 28th. The last month I was sitting here with Benjamin Mayer, a great friend and cultural jazzman, I say. And I received a call because there were some people looking for me in my house in Zacatecas. I invited Claudio Lomnitz, who will be talking tomorrow here, to Zacatecas 2 weeks earlier, and he quoted my book, and it got media attention that it hadn't gotten any time before. And so I became kind of a scapegoat for my, at my university and in my city. I was suggested not to go back to Zacatecas. I was invited to move to Mexico City and start another job and postdoctorate. I was considering it seriously and I was ready to move, but for familiar issues, I decided to stay there. And so I've been working now in the past year, finally at the philosophy school. And it was quite a summer, as you can imagine. So, well, that's context. I was planning on sharing some of that with you, but 20 pages are gone. This morning I took them off. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, now we're listening to
Yeah.
Sandor Goodhart, The Ruin, La Ruine and the Ruins, Les Ruines of Representation, Aesthetic Images and Sociological Histories in the Writing of René Girard and Emmanuel Levinas.
We're going to be able to go later than 8 because we're already, but yeah, but it's going to be extra time. You think that? All right. I'm going to try to do 4 things. Can we make that poem a little bit larger? Is it possible to make it a little bit larger? Plus large. I mean, so. Well, in particular, I want. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that will be good. Then we can move it up as we need to. Yeah. Okay. It's going to be. Oh well. Okay. Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to do 4 things here. One is I'm going to talk about the Keats poem. I'm going to talk about Plato's Republic, and I'm going to read you a little bit from Levinas. And then I want to just pose these questions that have been asked of us by Tanya. But take seriously her question to us in this conference. She asks us to consider a dialogical and critical space regarding images specifically, and what we're asked to consider is images along 2 distinct lines and in accord with 2 distinct thinkers. The lines are, of course, the contexts are the actual archaeological sites that we're living in right now for the state of this conference here in Mexico, and 2, the specific epistemological breakdowns and crises, especially the breakdown of meaning that Emmanuel Levinas describes, for example, in his essay called the Ruin of Representation, his essay on Husserl. And then of course, the 2 thinkers are René Girard and Emmanuel Levinas. But it seems to me, with specifically with regard to these thinkers in these domains and these historical crises, she asks us to consider whether or not mimetic desire need always issue in failure and violent conflict, and whether some positive alterity, that's the word she uses, which is a Levinasian word, positive alterity, rather radical otherness, positive alterity, may be possible, an alternative that I, for one, take to be an ethical consideration. And she asks us whether images may play a role in the, quote, and this is her word, in the conversion to that ethical alternative, that ethical alterity. And this morning, I thought in Marco's paper, addressed specifically this question of images with regard to Shakespeare, and maybe we can have a reference to that. Okay, I mean, in one sense, the assignment for me is fairly easy with regard to René Girard because he doesn't talk about images. I mean, I guess contrary to some other definitions of image, René Girard doesn't really consider aesthetics per se, the art for art's sake. That's not his concern. And as we learned in one of the talks this afternoon, when he does encounter violent images, it's too much. So it's either too little or it's too much. What he does is situate diachronically the specific events that were diachronically within this sacrificial mechanism. So that's really what's going on. And so images aren't per se the concern. However, there's an opportunity for us to think about in what way could we talk about images from a Girardian perspective? And it seems to me Levinas is going to make that possible. But he's going to make that possible largely through a negativity, because what Levinas writes about in reality and its shadow is how much he dislikes images. and he's responding to Sartre, because Sartre is the person who does like images and does use images in his talk about Sartre, what is literature, and Levinas is responding to that specifically and saying how unhelpful that understanding of images is, but except with one possibility. And the one possibility is that we become critical thinkers, and we introduce the word that's used by Levinas is criticism, criticisme. And he said, if we introduce criticism in regard to images, then it actually becomes a different kind of art. And so the great literary work, the master work, is actually the work that does use images, but uses them insofar as the artist becomes a philosopher in the course of writing about it. So the artist turns against his own artistry, his own image making, in order to become a philosopher. And this is in this line for Levinas is Molière, is Shakespeare, is Dostoevsky, is to some extent Goethe, and all of what we consider to be great literary works. So what sounds like an essay that's attacking literature is in fact an essay that's just supporting certain kinds of literature, although he's eschewing aesthetics and visual phenomena. And we it seems to me, and we want to, when we look at the text just for a minute, we want to ask why he might be doing that. Why he might be doing that. Okay, but what I want to take seriously this word that is used by Tanya, desire among the ruins, mimesis, and the crisis of representation. So I want to start with mimesis, because mimesis is really what brings Levinas and Girard together. There are, as you might know, two very different understandings of mimesis in Plato, in the Republic. And the first one occurs in the discussion that takes place in Book 2 and 3, and then one particular moment of Book 3, Socrates says, we're doing this lest from the imitation people imbibe the reality, less from the imitation they imbibe. Actually, let me just back up a little bit. He said, one of them asks, what is imitation? And Book 3, section 393c, one of them responds, is not likening oneself to another in speech or bodily bearing an imitation of him to whom one likens oneself. I mean, that's literally quoted from I think it's the Hamilton or Jewett quotation from Plato. And the answer is surely, as always the interlocutor says in Plato, surely. That can't be anything else, but that's what it is. And then Socrates, the speaker, says, in such cases, then it appears that he and other poets effect their narration through imitation. And then later on in Book 3, I just want to read you one very brief paragraph from Book 3, if I can find it here. Yeah, okay, here it is. Here's the paragraph. If then, I guess Socrates would say, if then we are to maintain our original principle that our guardians are to be released from all their crafts and to be expert craftsmen of civic liberty, pursue nothing else that does not conduce to this, would not be fitting for these to do or imitate anything else. But if they imitate, they should from childhood up imitate what is appropriate to them, and so forth and so on. But I want to jump to the last line of that paragraph, which he says, lest from the imitation they imbibe the reality. Or have you not observed that imitations, if continued from youth far into life, settle down into habits and second nature in the body and the speech and the thought? And so they become, in effect, truth. So truth, you could say, is on the basis of this passage from Plato, is the mimesis that wins, that gets to call itself truth that everything else mimesis. So I think that, and Girard is really taking up that idea, and he's simply extending it to desires. He's simply adding in desires. But basically, it's truth. It's the truth of the desires of the other, and it comes directly from Plato. The other end of Plato, however, gets into something entirely different, where the same word, mimesis, now comes to mean reproduction and third order distinction. We're always at least 3 removes, Plato says, in regarding couches and chairs. And those 3 removes could be identified as the ideal chair, the manufacturer of the chair, the user of the chair, and the imitator of the chair. Because we are in Plato imitators. We are for Plato the imitators. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to turn to this essay by Levinas, in which Levinas says very very clearly that he is. He tells us what he thinks about. He tells us what he thinks about images. Okay. Here's Levinas on art. Art brings into the world the obscurity of fate, Levinas writes. This is 1948, I believe, 38, I believe, yeah. Art brings into the world this obscurity of fate, but it especially brings the irresponsibility that charms as a lightness and grace. Revenge is gotten on wickedness by producing its caricature, which is to take it from its reality without annihilating it. Evil powers are conjured by filling the world with idols, which have mouths but do not speak. This is Levinas directly, as clear as he could be. Myth takes the place of mystery. Myth takes the place of mystery. The world to be built is replaced by the essential completion of its shadow. The illusion of shadow is, of course, coming from Plato. And then invoking philosophic writings of Kant, for whom the positive value of art resides in the disinterested quality, Levinas concludes, this is not the disinterestedness of contemplation, but of irresponsibility. The poet exiles himself from the city, and from this point of view, the value of the beautiful is relative. There is something wicked and egoist, cowardly in artistic enjoyment. There are times when one can be ashamed of it, as of feasting during a plague, for example. Art is not the supreme value of civilization, Levinas writes, and it is not forbidden to conceive a stage in which it will be reduced to the source of pleasure, having its place, but only a place in man's happiness. And this is published, of course, as I said, in 1948. And then the situation becomes confusing very quickly for Levinas, and I'll just give you a little bit more here. For however negative Levinas appears regarding artistic representation in this early post-war article, that negativity does not prevent him from extolling a number of writers. And I've mentioned some of them. Also Dickens, Gogol, Chekhov, Molière, Cervantes, and above all, Shakespeare. I actually put together a book of Derrida and Shakespeare, in which Levinas is, of Levinas and Shakespeare. Sorry, and there's Shakespeare is clearly his main guy. And to that list, Levinas adds, of course, Dostoevsky, which is for Girard a very important. And here's what he says: how are we to understand this dilemma? The answer Levinas tells us is the following: and the answer is criticism. All of this that we have said about art's irresponsibility and invasion is true for art separated from the criticism that integrates the inhuman work of the artist into the human world. Criticism already detaches it from its irresponsibility by envisaging its technique. It treats the artist as a man at work, already in inquiring after the influences he undergoes. It links this disengaged proud man to real history. And I'm going to stop with that particular set of quotations because I want to pose some questions, and then I want to turn to the Keats poem as a final example of we won't do Shakespeare today, but we will do Keats, which is close in some ways. And so what I want to ask is two things. There seems to me there's an obstacle and a possibility for answering Tanya's question regarding images in the language of Levinas and Girard. The issue, potential obstacle, is that Girard, and this extends to a lot of the conversations we've been having, in my personal view, is doing a diagnostic, a critical reading of cultural sociality. Levinas says somewhere that he's doing a phenomenology of sociality, sociality. And it seems to me both Girard and Levinas are doing a phenomenology of socialité. But it seems to me they're doing it from different places. They're not in contrast with each other. It's not a synchronic, here's this and there's that. It's a diachrony. It's a notion that Levinas finds extremely important. The notion of diachrony is not very, very widely known outside of phenomenological circles, but it means one damn thing after another. That's what it means. It's defined by Levinas as la durée, which comes directly from Bergson, and it's what sometimes we might call it the meanwhile. Levinas says it's the meanwhile. It's this place between those other things, the meanwhile. For me, Levinas and Girard relate as ethical to diagnostic. Girard is giving us an account of the order and disorder of all culture, and in the archaic and ancient world, and modern world, in in terms of the sacrificial and the scapegoat mechanism, but as a diagnostic. It does not say, okay, and here's what we need to do. That's my argument. That it takes us to the door of ethics. It leaves nothing out. We are ready to do ethics, but it seems to me it's Levinas who is one example, and it could be many examples, who does the ethical job that the Girardian thinking leads us up to. But putting it that way means there could be all kinds of other ethicals. I mean, this brilliant talk that was given by Duncan could be another version of how you do peace. You can do that, but precisely because Girard has opened the door to our doing it. He hasn't done it for us, with which we have to agree or disagree. We use his theory, his sacrificial theory of mimetic desire, of sacrificial substitution, to get us to this point of doing the ethical. And Levinas, for me, is one way of beginning the ethical. And I can actually reasonably, I think, pinpoint in response to Babak's question the other day, pinpoint the moment in which Levinas does that, which is in Ashvei Clausewitz, when Girard says we have to go to an issue of the saintly, the holy, and that's defined for him for Girard in Augustinian terms as intimation intime, mediation intime, which Bill translates as innermost mediation, but another translation might be intimate mediation as opposed to internal. You see, you can have internal, but this is intimate. So it's more internal than the opposite of external. Okay, so one issue is that we have to be careful to arrange the relationship of Girard and Levinas diachronically and not synchronically. They're not synchronically; they're related diachronically. One does diagnosis and analysis; the other one does the ethical. But there are sympathetic, because everything that Girard says is compatible, in my view, with what Levinas is saying. There's nothing that Levinas says that would deviate, that would cause us to rethink Girard. There's a mesh. There's a mesh there, in my view. But the second issue, it seems to me, comes from what we said regarding the Levinas article. The negativity can be overcome if we introduce criticism. And it seems to me that literature, Shakespeare and I would add John Keats and Moliere and Gogol and other writers that Levinas talks about, can be a way of thinking out a positive mimetic approach to images. So what I thought would be, take this perfect poem, which is about an image. The image is the urn, and what does an urn what does an urn contain? Ashes. So it's containing death, but of course but it's already old, and we're reading a poem about an urn, which is poem is itself a kind of urn that's already writing about. So let's go back to the beginning and just look at these. Then we'll jump quickly. Can we move our numero uno? Yeah. Can we go back up a little bit? We're at 4 and 5. Yeah, voila. So now look at the title. Ode on agreeer. Does on mean about? Concerning, or even circulating about? We walked about the gardens, or does it mean the ode is itself written in the urn and on the urn? So and in this case, it's both, because it's literally an urn on which there's a picture that he's going to describe. So thou, urn, still unravished bride of whiteness. I'm going to read it very quickly, but you can read it as you like. Sylvan is a foster child of silence and slow time. Sylvan historian thus can express flower tale more sweetly than I rhyme. What legend, what leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape? Deities or mortals, or both, in Tempe or Zales of Arcady. What men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes? What timbrels? What wild exit? You can already hear mimetic desire, in virtually everything that he's, every sentence of these lines. Okay. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit, ditties of no tone. Fair youth, now this is the image that's on the urn, this Grecian urn. All right. Fair youth, where was it? Fair youth beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never never, I think that's from Lear, never, never, when he walks out with the dead body of Cordelia, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. Yet do not grieve, do not engage in grieving. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, forever be third. An image is it's like a flower, and the flower is already dying. That's the idea of a flower, that the odor that we get is from the death of the flower, which is taking place. Oh, and watch the word happy in this. Oh, happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves nor ever bid adieu. Oh, and happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs for love. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm, still to be enjoyed, forever panting, forever young, all breathing passion for above, that leaves the heart high sorrowful and cloyed, burning forehead and a party time. I'm sorry I'm reading it so quickly, just trying to get through. And then what do we have? Sacrifice. The other side, but it's circular. You see, the lovers, if you go around it, the other side of it is precisely sacrifice. So where's this romance for us leads either by origin or future to sacrifice. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, mysterious priest, leads thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks, with garlands dressed, what little town or seashore, by river or seashore or mountain built with peaceful citadel, is emptied of this folk, this pious morn. Little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, not a soul to tell why thou art desolate, can e'er return. And then here, it seems to me, is Keats's commentary, which I'm lining up with Levinas and Girard on this. Can we move it up a little bit so you can see more fives? Because we're beneath the... Five, but just a little more, just a little bit more. There we go. Stop. Merci. Thank you. Gracias. Five. Oh, Attic shape. Attic means Greek, of course. Shape. This is what we're dealing with here is the aesthetic, simply a shape. That's what this is simply a shape of language, if you like, a shape of the world. Fair, and he plays on the word, how in what way is a shape? It's in the word itself. Attitude is like attic. It's the same letters, right? It's a fair attic, oh attic shape, fair attitude, or attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, literally overwrought, but too wrought at the same time. Exactly what we're saying about images. With forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, urn, silent form, dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity. Is that Christianity, eternity, that's making the same? Is Christianity an urn? Simply a very large urn that's making a promise, like the urn is simply a cold pastoral? Is that what's being said here? When old age shall this generation waste as it does every other generation, since what we're dealing with in reality is aging, dying, as I said earlier, like a flower. Thou, urn, shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend. What can images do? What is the best image? They're friendship. It's a friend to man, to whom image thou sayest, beauty is truth and truth is beauty. That's all you know on earth and all you need to know, right? So in some of the three medieval transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful beautiful turns out to be an epiphenomenon. It's after something you can only turn afterwards. But here he's equating it. He's saying that the urn would equate it. Aesthetics would equate beauty and truth with being identical to each other. But he's not, because in fact what's happening is this generation is wasting and is dying. So there we go. Thank you.
So,
And now we will listen to Sherwood Belangia.
It's started
Sacred imagery and meaning making in Heraclitus.
there. I don't know is the same coming talking to you. It's all the
Very good. Yeah, some quotes went around. I was struck walking around this beautiful city, especially in this part of the thing. And a few hundred meters from here, you can walk between the cathedral and the old ruins of the Mexica. You've probably seen that. And I was reading some of the plaques along beside the cathedral, and it turns out the materials for the cathedral were largely taken from out of the temple material, right? And as I thought about the ruins and the theme of ruins, and I thought about Heraclitus, and what we have of Heraclitus are ruins. We have pieces that were taken up and they were put to use in other buildings. We don't have the original ruin. All we have are these pieces that have been reassembled. And some of these pieces were used in buildings built hundreds and hundreds of years after Heraclitus and put to all kinds of different uses. And so Heraclitus is always being put to use. I'll try to put Heraclitus to use as well. And Girard used Heraclitus. As I have reflected on the Girard and philosophy, and we're working with Andreas on a book, and I think of all the philosophers in the canon, Girard was the most admiring of Heraclitus. He almost always speaks admiringly of Heraclitus. When we think about Heraclitus, we tend to think about, the part in Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World, when it's the logos of Heraclitus against the logos of John. But really what he's reacting to is Heidegger's use of Heraclitus, the way Heidegger took the fragments of Heraclitus and put them in his building, right? And the use that he made of Heraclitus. And the question is, Girard's admiration, is there a way to rebuild the story, try to restore it using the Girardian story? And I do think it gives us clues of how we might read Heraclitus if we're interested in Heraclitus rather than the uses that Heraclitus. Girard, this is the first quote in your thing. He says, Heraclitus, who's been called the philosopher of tragedy and whose equal claimed the title philosopher of myth, seems to me to have been on track of the same structuring force I'm now pursuing. Perhaps I anticipate, but I cannot refrain from mentioning that certain fragments of Heraclitus, until now mute and indecipherable, suddenly assume an obvious meaning in the light of my hypothesis. Does not fragment 60, and that's the one, strife is the father and king of all, some it makes gods, others men, some slaves and others free, display a clear summation of the origins of myth, of the role of violence in the engendering of the gods and of distinctions? Does it not offer a resume of all the questions that have been addressed in this chapter? And the chapter's coming from Violence in the Sacred, and Violence in the Sacred is almost a commentary on that fragment of Heraclitus. I mean, it almost makes the strong empirical case that Heraclitus was right about the origin of things. So there's a story in Diogenes Laertius about Socrates being handed a work of Heraclitus. So we can kind of get what it was like to actually read one of these texts, which we do not have. And Socrates is said to reply, the part I understand is excellent, and so too, I dare say, the part I do not understand, but it needs a Delian diver to get to the bottom of it. I don't understand what it means, but it's excellent. And so because it's fragmentary, and his the collector of the fragments, the German collector Hermann Diels, intentionally left it fragmentary, tried not to connect it into a narrative sequence. He thought that would better represented Heraclitus, but he didn't know. And it may have falsified Heraclitus in some sense by putting in that way. So he was he an advocate or a critic of the uses of violence? You can find texts either way. Was he a metaphysician committed to the primacy of change and contradiction, as Plato and Aristotle certainly or made use of him, not interpreted him, but made use of him? Or did he see change and flux as distracting features of a more unified whole? Again, one could find fragments that could justify either position. It's just the nature of this thing. And Heraclitus, I think, gives us maybe a clue how to read. He talks about, and this is number 2 in your handout, the Lord whose oracle is in Delphi neither declares nor conceals, but it gives a sign. Neither declares nor seals, gives a sign. And an oracle, like a parable, lends itself to rejection or misinterpretation by those whose mindset is not open to receiving it, as if describing colors to the blind. It can only signify but not reveal, and only one converted to the appropriate mindset, and this may or may not include the oracle herself, is attuned to understand what it reveals. And so maybe we read Heraclitus in that way. Mimetic theory, I think, is oracular in the same way, which is one reason Girard found Heraclitus so genial to his way of thinking, is not enough to explain the obviousness of mimetic influences in human affairs. One must also explain why its obviousness is so often resisted, right? And so Heraclitus is also grabbing the fragments of his own culture, which is imbued with sacrifice, imbued with mythic thinking. And it's astonishing when you look at the history of philosophy and you see how, again, saturated it is with the sacrificial. Terms that became central in ancient Greek philosophy had sacrificial origins. One is aitia. This is the word for cause. Aristotle's four causes, right? A cause is something Aristotle's using, that which is responsible for a thing being what it is. Okay, that's how Aristotle would use it. But aitia originally meant an indictment, a blame. It's to blame another. You know, it's the case marshaled against Oedipus, right? That's an aitia. It's a charge. The word category. Aristotle writes the book The Categories, right? Category, kata agorein, to stand up and accuse publicly. That's what that originally meant. And it becomes taken up into philosophy of the word category, right? That's this downward, that I'm a stand in the kata, and kata, Miguel, right? Accused publicly in the public forum. So our words and phrases, somebody invoked Wittgenstein earlier, you know, the extent of my words, the extent of my language is the extent of my world. Our words and phrases form our minds, and every time we use them, we tend to reinforce the mindset from which they come. And the vocabulary, words, and symbols that Heraclitus used were also created and molded by sacrifice. And I think that it explains some of his obscurity and some of his provocations that he used. He was called the obscure even in antiquity, the dark, the skotos, you know, the skotenos. That was Heraclitus. The first recorded piece of philosophy that we have, the text of the first recorded clip, and Girard does something with it, is the Milesian philosopher Anaximander, who predates, the Milesians predate Heraclitus. They're in Asia Minor. Heraclitus is in Ephesus. They're in Miletus. They come earlier. And here's the quote. The first fragment of philosophy is this, that we still have. And this is number 3, where things are born, I'm using Girard, though he used an old archaic translation, so I use that in this thing. This is from Girard. Where things are born, there too must they perish. For each in turn metes out punishment and expiation for its wickedness, each in its allotted time. There's this notion that the act of being, of this ecstasis of being, is itself an act of hubris and must be meted up and punished. And that's what the cosmos is. This thing, something standing out against the background. In the background, what the apparent, the indeterminate is the source of these things. Anything becomes determinate, it's an offense against the indeterminate, and the indeterminate pushes back down. Those of us who are Girardians, does that sound familiar? Yeah. So Girard says, in 4, in the evolution from ritual to secular institutions, men gradually draw away from violence and eventually lose sight of it. But an actual break with violence never takes place. That is why violence can always stage a stunning, catastrophic comeback. The possibility of such occurrence conforms to the dire predictions of divine vengeance that are to be found in every religious system. His rejection of this apocalyptic meaning explains why Heidegger has rejected the traditional translation of Anaximander's words. But it seems to me that he's missed the point completely, for the vengeance Anaximander alludes to is wholly human, not divine. In other words, not mythic. That's from Violence and the Sacred again. So he's taken this, he says, this is the whole thing. And not mythic, but it's mythic, right? It's recapitulating the myth. And this becomes the origin, in some sense, of philosophy that we get. And so this holy human, to read Heraclitus, what his concern is not cosmic metaphysics as such, but the human world and the human dilemma and the explanation of that. And so that's where I'm going to try to get that. He's a political thinker, and I think also a psychological thinker, and so try to hit those points. He had his predecessors, the Milesians. One was Anaximander, but the other two, the one considered the father of philosophy is Thales. We don't have any fragments of Thales. We are told that he believed that the arche of things was water, whatever that means. That's his great thing. An arche is an origin, a foundation, a beginning. It's an authority. It's what has preeminence. What do we need to understand in order to understand things? And his answer to that question, whatever it means, was water. So take that as you will. I didn't do the paper on that. That's coming up later on, the water. And then Anaximenes says, no, it's air. Anaximenes says it's air, right? And Heraclitus gives his own answer. His answer is fire. And the question is, are we talking about a materialist explanation? In the Philosophy 101 books, it would be say these are materialists. They saw materialists. I don't think that's right. I'm going to turn to Aristotle for a clue. He called them physicae. These are physicists, the people who are interested in physis. And Aristotle defines physis as an inner principle of change and being at rest. We might call it a motive. Okay? So Aristotle's answer to the Milesian question about the arche of things, the question of why things are they are, becomes a search for the inner principle that drives all things, a motive, if you will. Heraclitus, and this is number 5, the ordering, the cosmos, by the way, this is Charles Kahn's translation. He calls it the ordering, but the cosmos. The cosmos, the same for all, no God nor man is made, but it ever was and is and ever will be, fire ever living, kindled in measures and in measures going out. And the next one, all things are requital for fire and fire for all things, as goods for gold and gold for goods. So he's saying at the fundament of things is fire. Fire is basically the currency of the realm. You want to understand why things are they are. This idea of requital is very much following this Milesian Anaximander tradition. And I think there's echoes of Girard's description of the crowd as undifferentiated and the indeterminate, right? So fire in Heraclitus, and this is clear, I don't think I'm making this up, is associated in the fragments with war, with polemos, with strife, eros, conflict, dissonance. It is, as in Anaximander, a disordering source that gives rise to order in a cyclical pattern. The origin of all movement, whether creation, destruction, or transformation, is fire, or more broadly, opposition. I think that's the more general term for what he's doing. All things have their origin in and are motivated by opposition. Strife is the motive force behind all striving, right? I don't think that etymology is accidental. I think we can understand this as both social and psychological sense. But Heraclitus says, one must realize that war is shared, it's common, it's koinon, and conflict is justice, that all things come to pass and are ordained in accordance with conflict. Heraclitus, again, 8 on your paper. The counter thrust brings together, and from tones at variance brings perfect attunement, and all things come to pass through conflict. That's what I was thinking about when I was commenting on your thing. This dissonance that's precedes harmony. And then finally, the war is father of all things, right? That somehow it's conflict that is creating the originating force. And Girard gives us a way to understand that, right? About understanding that this a primordial conflict is at the heart of what we're doing. In 10, Girard, there's reason to believe that these and this is, I just picked one, this is one from Violence in the Sacred that I thought caught the idea of the ordering force of violence. There's reason to believe that the symbolic sites of unification give birth to all religious forms. The temple, right? It was there that the various cults were established, spatial relationships fixed, the clock of history set in motion, and the beginning of a social life plotted out precisely as Durkheim envisioned it. There everything begins. From there everything emanates. There everything returns when discord breaks out. So the arche and discord leading to a kind of cosmological order through the violence, fighting the violence, requiting for the violence, leading to new spates of violence. Yeah, I'm going to skip some of this here. How much time we got? We got plenty of time. Yeah, okay. So on the first page of his last book on Achebe Clausewitz, Girard invokes Heraclitus to understand modern humanity's implicit worship of violence. The sacred, which has been returning for 2,000 years, is thus not an archaic form of the sacred, but a sacred that has been satanized by the awareness we have of it, and that indicates through its very excesses the imminence of the second coming. Thus, what we are seeking to describe as occurring at the beginning, at the arche, applies increasingly to events in progress. The more and more is the law of relations among us as the violence grows in the world, this time at the risk of destroying it. Heraclitus wrote that Polemus, war, is the father of all and the king of all. Right? So when he's thinking about this apocalyptic vision, he cycles back to Heraclitus, that this end is a turn back to the origin. Violence also confers distinction in a world engendered by conflict. Heraclitus 12 in your paper, gods and men honor those who fall in battle. Almost treated as saints, and even in our world, right? These memorial, oh, you must be hushed because these are the people that died in battle. Greater deaths are allotted greater destiny. Greater deaths are the ones heroic in battle, and the best choose one thing in exchange for all, ever-flowing fame among mortals, and Heraclitus is already clear that that's won in battle. That's won through violence. Girard does some interesting things with some Greek psychology, and he picks up a couple of words that I want to talk about. The first is kudos. Kudos is an important word in Homer, and he highlights it in 15 he highlights it. He says, kudos, and this Homeric word, is best defined in terms of semi-defined, there's a divine prestige, of mystical election attained by military victory. It was the reward sought by both Greek and Trojan, particularly in single combat. There would be this moment called the aristia, this moment of excellence. And when the one who comes through and prevails, slaughtering so many in battle, right, acquires this kudos, this sort of imprimatur from the gods. In his Dictionary of Indo-European Institution, Vinaviste translate kudos as talisman of supremacy. It is the fascination of superior violence. Violence strikes men as at once seductive and terrifying, never as a simple means to an end, but as an epiphany. Violence tends to generate unanimity, either in its favor or against it, and violence promotes imbalance, tipping the scales of destiny in one direction or another. At the least success, violence begins to snowball, becoming finally an irresistible avalanche. Those who possess kudos see their strength multiplied 100-fold. Those deprived of it discovered that they are hopelessly handicapped. Kudos passes to the man who strikes the hardest, the victor of the moment. It belongs to the man who manages to convince others and who believes himself that his violence is completely irresistible. The opposition must then exert itself to break the spell cast by this conviction and to wrest the kudos from the enemy grasp. When the rivalry becomes so intense that it destroys or disperses all its objects, it turns upon itself. There's the Anaximander, this requital coming back. Kudos again becomes the ultimate object, an object of striving in the culture. And then another word, and I did a lot of the work with this in thinking about Plato and Aristotle, is this word thumos. Looks like thymos, but thumos. It means, and this is Girard in 16, means, for instance, soul, spirit, or anger, like the anger of Oedipus. At first glance, thumos has nothing in common, kudos, except for one trait, which we'd normally consider altogether trivial, its alternating character. When a man possesses thumos, he possesses an irresistible dynamism. When thumos is withdrawn, he's plunged into anguish and despair. Thumos is described from the word thuin, which means to make smoke, to offer sacrifices, to act violently, to run wild. Well, fire makes smoke, right? And this is the Heraclitan fire, the fire of conflict. Thumos, I actually think it means something more like competitive desire. It's almost a correlate from mimetic desire, but it's mimetic desire that's concerned for social goods. Okay, so in the Greek psychology, which also is physiology, you had epithumia, which had its seat in the loins, in the genitals, in the viscera. And that's where the base appetitive desires come for sex and for food. Then at the moment of the rib cage starts taking over in the chest, it's the beating heart and the heaving lungs. It's the place of competitive urge and fire, right? When the heart starts beating, right? You get that power from within, and it was likened to the rib cage was actually seen as a cage that held back this ventilated smoke, right? That's going to come up, and then of course you have the head, seat of intellect. I'm going to skip the rest of that one. And thumos, and he highlighted this, it comes from an Indo-European root that shares with the English word fume, and fuming, right? Archaic sense, still fuming over that insult. And thusia comes from that word, the word for sacrifice, the same root for this word for smoke. And so the sacrifice itself is the venting. It's like the thumos of the society. It's that moment when it exercises itself and the smoke rises up and it vents its vengeance. Thumos also means anger. It's often taken to mean anger. So thumos is very important of this, and I think Heraclitus, when he's talking about a fire, he's thinking very much about this, and he's thinking about what drives human motivation, and it's this conflict. There's one, I'm almost embarrassed by putting it in there, I forgot to write the source because it's important, but number 17, he relates fire. We don't have the quote, but it's embedded in a quote that seems to associate it with need and satiety, right? Very, very much at the level of desire. 18, all things are requital for fire. We talked about that. 19, and this I want to see in terms of an inner escalation. To the soul, to the psyche, belongs a report that increases itself. It's this augmenting. We live through the thumos. When we lose the thumos, we're dead in this culture, right? To the extent that we have soul, this exhalation vented from the thumos, right? There's a report that increases itself, this logos with a constant increase. And then Heraclitus, one must quench. And this is Charles Kahn's translation. Violence quicker than a blazing fire. The word translated violence there is hubris. And it's hard to fight against passion, for whatever it wants, it buys at the expense of soul. All right, I'm gonna skip ahead in order of time. There's a quote that Girard was very fond of, and I want to talk about it. He talks about. This is at line 23, and I think he actually comments on this one in War as the father and king of all, but this was the one that he seems to really applaud. Heraclitus says, if it were not Dionysus, for whom they march in procession and chant the hymn to the phallus, their action would be most shameless. But Hades and Dionysus are the same. Him for whom they rave and celebrate, Levinas. So Levinas, this Bacchic rebel, right? These things, these transgressions that nobody would think of doing. And Heraclitus was very cynical about the religion around him. Ephesus was a kind of a pilgrimage site. It was the site of the Temple of Artemis. It was a site of a lot of this sort of cultic ritual, and he sneered at it. He took a cynical stance on almost a prophet. You know, your gods are detestable to me. You know, you're looking at it. You've got it all wrong. And Girard in 24, before placing too much confidence in Nietzsche, our era should have meditated on one of the most sharp and brilliant sayings of Heraclitus. Dionysus is the same thing as Hades. Dionysus, in other words, is the same thing as hell, the same thing as Satan, the same thing as death, the same thing as the lynch mob. Dionysus is a destructiveness at the heart of violence, contagious, from evolution converting. But there's another side of Heraclitus that we tend not to see. There's the Heraclitus of violence and strife, but there's this other Heraclitus that looks at measure and proportion and the common, right? And the logos even. And he uses logos at separate registers. One logos is the level of the human, but then there's this logos, almost this divine logos, which Aristotle will take up, but I mean, it's kind of a nous, the mind that controls all things, right? There's almost this monotheistic, transcendent impulse in Heraclitus that emerges from his quotes. And I'll just hit a few of these. 42, through lack of faith, the divine escapes being known. There's pistis, there's faith, right? 43, if you do not hope, you will not find the unhoped for, since it's hard to be found and the way is all but impassable. That he felt like that there's a human understanding to which divine understanding is always transcendent, right? It's always going to find itself lacking. And if we try to fix it in representation, right, we will do violence to it. And Heraclitus is the first recorded instance we have of the word philosopher. There's a quote. He says, the philosophos must concern himself with many things. But interesting, his relation to Sophia, to wisdom, he coins this term, it seems, philosophos, a friend to wisdom. So you've got, in some sense, faith, hope, not agape, but Curtis and I think a stand-in for it, philia, right? That our proper stance is one of philia, and that the love we're supposed to imitate is the love that we find, you know, at philia, at the heart of things. And so, yeah, let me just finish with this is mine. The logos of Heraclitus anticipates, if through a glass darkly, the logos of John. These two Ephesians, you know, John, according to legend, settled in Ephesus, in the home of Heraclitus, with the Virgin Mary, right? Anybody been there? Yeah, these ruins. And Heraclitus and John shared a common vocabulary. I'm not the first to notice it. It's the same, in arche and logos. It's right out of Heraclitus, with a Heraclitean understanding of logos. Both were brilliant revealers of the violent order they found themselves in, but understood that wisdom amounted to transcending it. And, you know, I make the point. Christianity actually arose at the confluence of two mighty rivers, the Hebraic and the Jew. I mean, Hebraic and the Greek. And I see Heraclitus as this prevenient, almost prophetic figure. I think John makes use of it. I think they, just like Paul and Mars Hill, you know, let's take this one idol and let's do something with it. But anyway, I make the place he's as Old Testament as Isaiah from the standpoint of Christianity. Anyway, that's my apology for Heraclitus.